C3S 10th anniversary commemorative event, the two-day international seminar on trends and transformations in China's geopolitics, strategy, society and business. Sir R.S. Vasan, Indian Navy retired, to kindly deliver the welcome address. A brief in our studies.
Very good morning to all of you. Honorable Raksha Mantri, Srimati of China Studies, Ambassador Ganapati, Member C3S, Professor Surnarayan. Very good morning and a hearty welcome to all of you. Can we ask the press to kindly not speak? Thank you. It's a great day for us in Chennai Center for China Studies as we complete 10 years of existence, a fruitful existence, I must say. The idea was from late B. Raman, who was the international counter-terrorism expert, who put together a team of experts over here, and we've been running it ever since, mostly on voluntary basis, trying to understand China a little better. By and large, this has yielded results, and this is a great occasion because we are able to get the support of Honorable Raksha Mantri, Nirmala Sitharaman, and she had her own commitments, and yet she was able to readjust her own schedule to be able to come here and be with us to deliver the keynote address. C3S itself is perhaps the only think tank that's away from Delhi, which is specializing in China issues. And therefore, what we put out in the public domain in terms of providing policy options, in terms of generating discussions, and in terms of engaging the youth particularly. I must tell you that we have over 200 young members who are registered as young members of Chennai Center for China Studies, and they are the ones who are contributing to understanding the mind of the youth in terms of India-China relations. We have also been encouraging a lot of interns to come and do their internship with us. We've done about 32 internships so far, and you'll see that some of the publications which are brought out by them will be released by the Honorable Raksha Mantri today. As I said, these efforts to try and understand China better is something that is our focus. We have a wonderful team of those who volunteer, which includes former ambassadors, academia, army, navy, and young people who are there, businessmen. So I think this is the strength of Chennai Center for China Studies, where we are able to harness the collective expertise and experience of these people and therefore engage in the study of China. So this milestone of 10th anniversary is something that we look forward to be able to celebrate. This will be a year-long celebration more in terms of understanding the nuances of India-China relation. Note that coincidentally, we did not plan it this way, the SEO summit is happening tomorrow onwards. It's not that we planned for this, so it one leads to another, and therefore the deliberations in the next 2 days, tomorrow and day after. We have wonderful people who have come from all over. Let me extend a very hearty welcome to the Nirmala Sitharaman. She will be introduced subsequently by Asma Masood. But Madam, personally I am very grateful to you for this gesture, very kind gesture, that you are able to readjust your schedule and be here with us. It means a lot to us in terms of our own activities. Ambassador Ganapati has joined us recently. He brings to the table his rich experience from the foreign ministry. He has held important portfolios in different continents and different.
Minister of Defence Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman to kindly light the lamp. I request Ambassador M. Ganapati, Member C3S, to present the book. And I now request Commodore Vasan, Director C3S, to gift the dignitary with a memento.
Thank you.
Chennai. Sri B.S. Raghavan sir, may I request you to...
Matter of achievement. Nirmala Sitaraman impressed me on 3 counts. First, when I met her some months ago to share my ideas on how to make this country number 1 in the world, I noticed her capacity to listen was something that I had not seen before. Very carefully, very patiently, very intently, she listened to me for more than 45 minutes. Our sage Thiruvalluvar of Tamil, 3000 years ago, devoted a whole chapter on listening, the importance of listening on the part of a leader. That was something, a memory that will not be erased from my mind. Her patience, her willingness, her intensity. During the entire period of 45 minutes to 1 hour, she did not allow any interruption, any phone call. Concentrated application of mind to what was being said. The first most important element of leadership. Second, as a student of management, her keenness, her efforts to see things for herself, another very, very vital ingredient of leadership. Not to accept assumptions, not to accept what is presented, but have things corroborated, validated by personal inspection, to see things for oneself. The third, and to my mind, the most important of all, was the imagination and the vision with which she approached issues, not as issues, but as something to do with human beings. Building of rapport, instant rapport, and to ensure that people are motivated, inspired by one's own example. That kind of an imagination, vision. 10 ambassadors to China wouldn't have accomplished in their tenures. Not even maybe summits could have accomplished this. What she accomplished in 20 minutes on the Nathula Pass. She goes to, within a couple of months of joining, she goes to Nathula, and she just didn't go around and come back. She goes towards the 30-40 Chinese soldiers to the very border of the line of control and smiles at them. The Chinese soldiers, the Chinese there had no option but to smile back. Number 2, she did something that took my breath away. I wrote to her at that time that I was thrilled by that visit, because he goes and teaches the Chinese how to greet Indian people with their namaste. He teaches them how to say namaste and makes them say namaste. Now, many people see country relations as something of an abstract proposition, something to do with scholarly pronouncements. But believe me, country relations are built upon this kind of imaginative handling of human relations. If you want to know how dramatic the impact was, when you go home, you go to Google and type there, Nirmala Sita Raman teaches Namaste to Chinese soldiers, and you will see a very interesting and very impactful clip. I think that summarizes these three elements, summarize her approach to her assignment, to her job, are going to make the future world order meaningful for the people of the planet. We already have about 6 billion people. We are racing towards 8 billion, 10 billion people. And we need not the old world order where we think in conventional shibboleths, where we deal with the same phraseology that we had been using for the past 100 years. Because this world, whether we like it or not, willy-nilly is becoming one world, for the simple reason that today, as never before in the history of human beings on this planet, we are having 5 revolutions taking place simultaneously. Never before in the 4.5 million years of human habitation of this planet had so many revolutions been taking place simultaneously. Between the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution, it was 1,000 years. Between one revolution, between industrial revolution and the electronics revolution, it was an equally big gap. But today, 5 revolutions: knowledge revolution, communications revolution, technology revolution, social engineering revolution, where the barriers between human beings, caste, communities, distinction, geography, they are being broken, where time and distance are being eliminated. And the most important of all revolutions, the 5th revolution, the revolution of the people's rising expectations. They are no longer willing to put up with the old style of management, the old style of dealing with issues. They are no longer willing to put up. They are becoming aware. Even people who may not be educated from our point of view are getting massive political awareness by sheer participation in democratic and also in public affairs. Therefore, it is a dynamic country, and we are very often apprehensive as to how to deal with such a situation. But its growth momentum and rising trajectory are yet to peak. It may last for another till the end of the century. So we have to reckon with a country which has not yet reached its peak. And we will have to ensure that we deal with that country in a spirit of self-confidence. How do we do that? We will have to develop our own inner strength. The answer to dealing with a country which is so very dynamic and which imparts so much of momentum to world affairs is to ensure that we enter into a healthy competition with that kind of a country. Therefore, what we have to do is, we have in India a problem. That is to say, we have some complexes, we have some hang-ups, with reference to China. I do not want to go into many of those things, but we have to get out of that, and that is the best way by which we can ensure that we come to terms with the new development in this country. I am very passionate about this because I believe that if only China and India come together, they will be the pioneers in bringing about a new world order. Therefore, it is time to put all our reservations behind. I can only hope that India's Prime Minister and Chinese President in their informal summit recently made it an occasion to effect a turnaround by discarding the old inhibitions and complexes bedeviling their relations, and used it as a golden opportunity to decide on brave new moves for a brave new world to promote mutual trust, economic cooperation, and collective effort to build a brand new world order.
In 1975, he was Consul General of India, Sydney, 2001 to 2005. From 2011 to 2012, he was Secretary West, Ministry of External Affairs.
I, of course, consider it an honor and privilege to be here with all of you as the Centre celebrates its 10th anniversary, along with the National Maritime Foundation, Chennai. I congratulate the Centre for completing an eventful 10 years with a successful and result-oriented innings. I should recognize the signal contribution of the founders of the Centre, Mr. B.S. Raman, and the immediate past director, Dr. D.S. Rajan. Their legacy was always difficult to emulate, but has been ably carried forward by Director Commodore R.S. Vasan and his very competent team, both young and old. The patron, President Professor Surya Narayan, and other members of the Centre also deserve our gratitude. The support and guidance of the Ministry of External Affairs towards the Centre's activities has been helpful. On the eve of the Centre's 10th anniversary, the Centre was ranked 48th in the Global Independent Think Tank Index, and the Centre, as the patron said, has been widely followed. Of course, it's always a very difficult task to follow an inspiring speech as that made by this patron. What I say might look a little more insipid compared to the energy which the patron brought to his address. The decennial anniversary of the C3S comes at a significant period in time. The Cold War came to an end nearly 3 decades ago. The post-Cold War era has seen the development of a new strategic canvas. Alliances have changed and shifted. Countries have unified or dissolved. New challenges and dangers have come to the fore, and new power centers have emerged. The focus of attention has shifted eastwards from the Atlantic towards what was initially called as the region of the Asia-Pacific to what is today termed as the Indo-Pacific. Besides traditional issues, new complex and non-traditional threats have emerged, posing greater challenges to international peace and security. Terrorism, organized crime, cyber crimes, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, drugs and arm running, environmental degradation including water availability and air pollution, social stability are some areas of considerable interest and concern to the international community. And the Cold War has given way to trade wars. Mismatch between expectations and deliverance will have its own repercussions. With the diminishing authority of the erstwhile powers, China felt that its rightful place had arrived to occupy center stage in this equation. A self-assured China has started to assert itself among the Committee of Nations. In his broadcast to the BBC in October 1939, Winston Churchill had seen Russia as a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, adding perhaps there was a key, that being Russian national interest. Would this be applicable to China today, which is transparent to a few but opaque to many, but which sees its national interest premised on correcting perceived injustices of the past. With the Indo-Pacific gaining prominence in the geopolitical and geostrategic landscape, India's role also becomes redefined. This will have its own resonance in the bilaterals between India and China. The theme of the two-day seminar, titled Trends and Transformations in China's Geopolitics and Strategy, Society and Business, is appropriate. It would cover nearly every aspect of China's internal and external situation. And for India, China as a neighbor ranks high in terms of national interest and national security. The takeoff point in analyzing developments relating to China as it moves ahead in the 21st century is the 19th Congress of the Communist Party of China, which took place in October 2017. The Congress anointed Xi Jinping as the uncontested leader of China with powers never before given to any of his predecessors. Xi Jinping has consolidated his power and authority over all institutions of state in China. He is the General Secretary of the party, the President of the People's Republic, Chairman of the Central Military Commission, and heads of groups dealing with national security, internet security, economic reform, among others. Xi was anointed as a co-leader in 2017, Ling Xiu vice and great leader in 2018, and the National People's Congress removed term limits on the office of the President. The 19th Party Congress enshrined Xi's vision for China's future, the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics in a new era in the party's constitution. This compares him with Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping in having his eponymous ideological contribution reflected in the party constitution. Xi's institutional mechanisms to resolve problems in the border areas. China has not been overly enthusiastic in supporting India's permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Even the Wuhan underscored the importance of reform of multilateral financial and political institutions. The Wuhan summit noted that future direction of India-China relations would be built upon mutual respect for each other's developmental aspirations and prudent management of differences and mutual sensitivity. Trust is a word which needs emphasis, but with the caveat of the Russian proverb, doveryai no proveryai, which means trust but verify. An area of concern mutually has been imbalance in trade. Raksha Mantri herself was a former commerce minister and took up this matter regularly. Trade balance is heavily in favor of China, and the recent 11th meeting of the Joint Ministerial Commission saw the Chinese minister mentioned earlier also that they would make efforts to look at these issues. Prime Minister, of course, also mentioned to President Xi that pending issues include greater access for Indian exports for the agricultural and pharmaceutical sectors, as also in the services sector, including IT and ITES services, tourism, and healthcare. India, of course, continues to express its reservation on the Belt and Road Initiative, seeing it as an unilateral initiative lacking in transparency from a financial and project proposal perspective. India is equally concerned on the sovereignty issue. India and China recognize the common threat posed by terrorism in all its forms and manifestations and have strongly condemned it. However, China's opposition to designate Masood Azhar in the 1267 Sanctions Committee is surprising. At the same time, China is going with the consensus on bringing Pakistan on the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force is a positive development.
An MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, 2014, and was re-elected in 2016. She was the Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance of India. May I now request her to kindly address the gathering.
It's an honor that I've been invited to be here, especially when you're holding, along with the National Maritime Studies, a two-day interaction and also a seminar, I understand. To address you in this context makes me feel extremely honored. A gathering of scholars at a time when the global landscape, global geopolitical, geostrategic landscape is in a churn. It's very easy, of course, to say it's no longer bipolar, it is no longer unipolar, and then start talking about various options. But Yes, but yes, it is a time of churn, and at a time when China is emerging, the description of how China is emerging, what are the kind of strengths it has shown, where is it in the global economy, where is it in the global political arena, and so on, has already been very nicely described. But before I get into some of the details of what I would like to say to you, I think the idea of having a center outside of Delhi, a think tank outside of Delhi, a think tank which, as I was very pleased to hear, which I've also read earlier, has attained a certain global recognition and ranking, a think tank which is able to draw global scholars, and a think tank which is so focused, particularly on a country, as the ambassador very beautifully described, a complex country, and not a very transparent country. That's not my judgment, but it is an observation which many scholars have come to agree on. A country whose political system is not as defined by any of us about any other country elsewhere. You will say, oh, this is open democracy, oh, that's a very closed whatever. But here is a country which is probably a blend of several things. So for a center outside of the national capital to be focused on a very important country, a country with whom we share a very long international border, a country with whom, as was rightly pointed out, our economy draws so much, aspires to give so much. A center, a think tank, if it is focused on a country of that nature, you can understand the criticality of supporting such a center. We need such think tanks, welcome if they are outside of Delhi, and here is a center which easily energizes the narrative which has the peninsular focus, south of India focus. That's a very catchy narrative in India, particularly when you're standing somewhere in the south. But when you're looking at think tanks, there is strength in the argument that you need a center south of India, so you need a center of that stature with a peninsular perspective for a country which shares a border with this big neighbor. And therefore I give my words of commiseration, great sense of appreciation that it has had a successful 10-year tenure, and I'm sure you will have a bright several more decades. The Government of India, because I've had interaction with the MEA, Ministry of External Affairs, talking about this center, the MEA's representatives have also had a great sense of appreciation for the work which is going on here. So I'm here amidst you all, for whom Government of India has a great respect and looks forward to hearing your views. And before I get into the actual topic, I take this opportunity, even though I was a bit overwhelmed, and I don't want to use the word embarrassed, but I was indeed, for the copious praise that the patron Sri Raghavan has had for me. He's always been encouraging me. I'm grateful for that. That motivates me nevertheless. But even as I say that, I also would want to just recall that the founder, P.S. Raman, much before I became a minister, also has shared a few such words with me, and I recall that with a great fondness. It was not a very happy moment when all of us suddenly we heard about his demise. But I take this opportunity to pay my respects to him and the respect with which I held him for the excellent work that he had done prior to his retirement. So with all that said, I want to just talk about the China-related matters. As I said, we are talking about China at a time when there is a great churn. Geostrategical, geopolitical matters are all available for every country to have its own perspective. India, particularly after 2014, with the energy that the Prime Minister has invested in building in India's external affairs, India's strategic thinking, attempt to position India not as a regional power, as a power which is growing in its stature, probably as a power which probably, for whatever reason, has been kept in the sidelines in many of the high tables of the global negotiations, has taken every step possible to bring India to the fore. He has not hesitated to push the frontier further every time, as you would know. Every visit that he has undertaken was, of course, to draw investment from those countries, but equally to project the Indian strength, whether it is in your manufacturing, whether it is in your agriculture, or whether it is in the soft power that India would hold, being a cultural leader, particularly when you're talking of the spread of Buddhism from India, from the way ancient kings, the Cholas in particular, who spread into the Southeast Asian nations and so on. So when he knew, and I suppose that's the way in which India's strengths were taken forward to various countries, each according to the strength that we had, whether it is of this millennia or of earlier millennia. So he has not hesitated to speak about India's strength then, as much as he would speak of India's strength today, whether it is in IT or whether globally, whether we in India recognized it or not, India had brand value for its Ayurveda, brand value for its yoga, brand value for the experts that Indian services provided, whether you're nurses, whether you're chartered accountants, whether you're doctors. So there was no stone unturned, as you probably would say. But under Modi, that's been, if you notice, the tactic with which he took India globally. And as a result, within the 4 years, you've had India recognized in the sense it was unsaid but was recognized earlier, but was there a recognition to brand it with India, to take India, when you talk about geopolitics, to take all these also as a strength of India? Not so much copying what China has done, but matter of fact, when you look at China, when over the decades China projected itself for the strength of its economy, the kind of language, the ancient culture, the kingdoms that have been, and so on, for its herbal medicine. So many things also together made what you would have understood of China, but India, for instance. And this is not really getting into a easy narrative, but matter of fact, India, for instance, would have gone with a narrative which is, it's all right, you produce great engineers, it's all right, you produce wonderful doctors, it's all right, all over the world. Brain drain happening in India has benefited the rest of the world and so on, but why is there poverty in your country? You wouldn't probably ever deny this. So you would have that kind of an identification. I'm sure when you're talking about China, even today there are parts of China, regions within China, some pockets within China which do have developmental indicators which are not as good as that which you would see in Shanghai or Guangzhou or Beijing. But that successfully they overcame over the decades and were able to promote an image of their country as a growing power. So that is one thing which the Prime Minister definitely wanted to break that mold and take India for its strength wherever he went. As a result, today you have India being seen as a emerging power, but not a regional power anymore. You are able to talk about Vasana, you are able to talk about MTCR, you are able to go to the UN to say what you think in terms of world's counter-terrorism efforts will have to be. You're able to contribute, you're an important partner in terms of sharing intelligence which is required to take care of global strategies for terrorism, countering terrorism and so on. Now, if that is one angle, the other is recognition also, not just from one country, of how India is now at the center of a whole lot of developments globally. The fact that we kept saying India, look east, act east, and also started speaking about Indian Ocean. Today we've understood that we are a key player in the Indo-Pacific. And I might be probably jumping a bit away from the platform that I'm creating, but to say the narrative when you're talking of budget for the armed forces, I am also seeing that the need for greater support for our maritime adventures not in that sense, maritime activities, whether it is your HADR, whether it is your SAR activities, it's no longer just your Indian Ocean waters. You're going further. Like as I'm talking today, you have our fleet, some of our ships which are in Guam, participating in some exercise. Only recently we were in Vietnam. So your look east, act east, your Indian Ocean, your Southeast Asia is now stretching further to the extent that, however you may call it symbolic, the US command, which was the Pacific Command, is Indo-Pacific Command. In a way, it tells me the centrality of India in this whole process. The role that India will have to play in the Indo-Pacific region is what is getting underlined. And therefore, I see that at a time when you're looking at, in fact, there are times when I was, initial days when I took a lot of briefing from non-ministerial, non-force related, headquarters related outsiders who were coming and talking to me. Outsiders, experts who live civil lives, who came and talked to me. There was once somebody who did say that it's all right in India, we look at the hills, we look at the Himalayas, we look at the desert borders, naturally because you have our neighbors with whom you have a very sometimes challenging relationship. And this person once turned the map around and showed it to me. Now you're Raksha Mantri, would you also want to turn 180 degrees and see from where you are to the seas that are below us, the extent of the water and the activities which are happening there. 40% of your trade, your crude, your this, and 40% not just of your trade but also trade of China passes through these waters. What does that strategically imply to you? Are you looking at dealing with that? And that's exactly where, much to our notice, and we do take cognizance of it, a lot of activities have been happening. It's not as if it's for the first time. The entire narrative of the string of pearls also emerged from there. So India's position today is very clearly not just dealing with the northern borders, in many places which is not so defined, the western borders which is defined but where you have issue almost every day, but this whole stretch of the water through which, whether you're containing piracy in the maritime terrain, or whether you're looking at Malacca, whether you're looking at Sunda, or whether you're looking at further Indonesia, the importance of or the presence of very many other forces which you have to take into your cognizance is what we are repeatedly doing in the ministry. And when we are talking of all these, like the way it was rightly referred, post-October 2017, we are looking at a different China where the leadership has done quite a lot in terms of internal restructuring. Slightly before that, we had quite a lot of conversation of how the Chinese economy, moving away from an export-driven economy, was looking at a consumption-driven economy, and therefore the nature of industry was all being absolutely revamped. A structural adjustment within China for looking at an economy which had maximum derived its strength from export-driven activities was now at a position, probably comfortably placed, strongly placed, to be able to get that changed, have the industries refocus on domestic market. So there was this whole structural reshuffle or restructuring happening of the industries in China, which would probably place less weight on exports but look at greater importance of domestic consumption. That was happening. Simultaneously, we heard about how the yuan was aspiring to become a global currency. Till today, all of us are aware, and many monetary experts would say how. The position of a currency of international exchange would still be with the dollar, less with the pound. But you started realizing that the aspirations of the Chinese was to make the yuan, the renminbi, to become an international currency, and therefore there was also the speculation at one point in time that the undervaluing currency valuation related decisions which China had taken, all within a month, I think about 3 times the currency was devalued. These were very much well before October 2017. So the revamping, structurally changing of the economy and its driving forces and its priorities took a top agenda before October 17 in China. But post 17, we know that there is a lot of rationalizing of the armed forces. Rationalizing of the armed forces in China to make it a far more lean and mean machine, to make it a machine which will depend more on technology than on manpower, restructuring to make it far more theater driven rather than border area north, south, east, west driven, are all happening. The current restructuring and modernization of the PLA itself, as I said, involves joint theaterization, reorganization of the Central Military Commission, the CMC as they call it, and the raising of PLA rocket forces, the PLARF, PLA Strategic Support Force, as well as conversion of its existing forces into a combined arms brigade, are all majorly noticed. The global community is watching them. These have happened, probably started earlier, but post October 17. Newer technologies are being infused. There's just no doubt about it. Newer technologies, whether it relate to weapon and weapon systems, are all coming into its inventory. The reduction of the troops that I've talked about, I think it's reduced it to about 3 lakhs post the reforms. And therefore then, as a natural corollary, you will only see more money, more resources being spent on infrastructure and technological development. Needless to say, I'm standing in a think tank. We'll certainly take a cue from it. Even as I say that there is a structural readjustment of its armed forces, the way in which resources are being spent, it's not like the economy where we spoke about not export driven, but it's going to be looking inward, make it far more consumption driven. Now these reforms which are happening about its armed forces, these reforms which is happening about reduction in its forces, the manpower, these reforms which wherein you're able to now divert a bit of your resources towards advancement in technology, whilst that is happening, there is no letting up in terms of its external forays. The recent Djibouti base that they've started in the Horn of Africa does highlight that whilst the economy still depends a lot on exports, however they have reshifted their focus into consumption driven, their activity externally is as was before or more strengthened. Now perhaps, as was rightly observed, it's not just strategic for strategic, but strategic through economic too. The kind of economic assistance being extended to many of our neighbors, many of the island nations, are all very clearly impacting the economies there, probably helping to bond the relationship with those countries. As a result, even strategic presence could be enabled. What happens to the economic burden which may result in terms of servicing of those loans is a different issue altogether. But I see a linkage. You are able to build a bond through your economic assistance. And that probably matures into a strategic relationship, post which it could be a different ballgame where you will wonder if this economic relationship itself is serviceable, maintainable, continuable, extendable further. This is something which I think all of us will have to, you as think tank, we as government will have to constantly be alert to and understand its ramifications. The focus of the reforms, I'm not, I suppose, giving what the think tank will have to tell me. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that I lay before you some of these thoughts to just assure you that the ministry is equally observing, learning, understanding the dynamic changes that are happening. And therefore, I'm leaving this before you, nothing so much as to say, look, we know so much, what can you give? Not at all. Just give you an assurance that we are looking at different layers of information, taking them on board, making them part of what our process of decision making is. The focus of reforms, therefore, is evidently moving towards the PLA Navy, PLA Air Force, and the PLA, as I said, rocket forces, as opposed to the erstwhile emphasis on just the PLA. Now it's really structured, layered, and going down to specifics. And therefore it is important for Indian think tanks to understand where this is going to crystallize and how are we constantly going to be ready with the response. Now, even as I said about the external presence, took the example of Djibouti. For us in India, the elephant in the room, as you would say, is the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Cooperation Corridor. We've very clearly stated our position there. It's an issue of sovereignty, and we shall not entertain any thoughts on that matter. There's been complete and I think increased dependency of Pak military on Chinese arms and equipment. A fundamental reorientation of the China-Pakistan relations is not likely. However, the relationship is really getting intense. But one thing I want to assure here is we do not view our relations with China through the prism of China-Pakistan relations. We certainly do not view our relationship with China through the prism of China-Pakistan relationship. There are increased transgressions across our perception of the LAC by the PLA troops, and that results in every now and then news about face-offs, and that's been now probably a discernible pattern that is emerging in the northern borders for us. However, I think I would lay emphasis on the fact that there is a greater engagement of India with China. India's participation in the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation countries, is definitely giving us greater opportunity for engagement, and engagement itself, therefore, can be one of the very strong ways in which relationship can be bettered. It's not going to be something for want of engagement. The borders are hot or the borders are cold or whatever. There is enough and more opportunities, platforms available for us to constantly engage with China. And India enjoys excellent bilateral relations also with other members of the SCO. We have bilateral cooperation with many of them, and therefore the relationship with China in particular through the SCO has seen a lot of reinvigoration. The mechanisms which are existing, whether it's your border personal meet, the dispute redressal meets, the crisis management study group meets, the NDC in India and the PLA in China are all, PLA's NDU in China are all actively every now and then engaging, and it's a very important necessity to this relationship, this engagement through these various existing mechanisms are kept active for confidence building. And with that said, I think I will give a minute to what the ambassador rightly said. It's been the Prime Minister's USP in forging a personal level relationship with the Chinese leaders, particularly with the President of China, as was seen even with the President of Russia. He's now made a very vigorous engagement possible even in an informal meet. The Chinese leadership themselves very clearly mentioned that for the first time in China's history, twice, not just once, for the same leader from the same country, the Chinese leadership agreed to welcome him outside of Beijing. Outside of Beijing, this time in Wuhan, the President having an informal meeting with our Prime Minister. And not just one meeting in the morning or the next meeting in the next day, it was like through the day engagement, breakfast meeting, meeting during lunch, but meeting at a different site where I think once you are out of that room, which is a formal engagement room, delegation level meeting room, a lot of possibilities emerge. The Prime Minister, by having this informal engagement, which the Chinese president gave all the time, 2 full days of engagement. People constantly say, what is this informal? It's never been so. Why not now? Why should it be now? And so on. But I would put it before you that this long-term engagement, this informal engagement, and just not one-off meeting, but consistent flowing through the day for 2 days engagement, will have some outcome in the short term, but without doubt, in the long term, the relationship between India and China will immensely benefit from this engagement. At our levels, of course, when we've talked with our counterpart, my senior colleague, Honorable Sushma Swaraj, also in the SCO summit, engaged with the External Affairs Minister of China. I was there, along with the other SCO members. In our bilaterals, several issues in the light of post-Doklam kind of a era, we have engaged and asked for. I have requested them that there should be a greater interactive forum. We should have definitely a hotline between India and China, so that if there are situations like the ones which we faced, where of course lots of different level of engagements have happened over the months, 72 days if I do know right, a hotline would definitely reduce the time consumed in reaching the empowered decision makers when there is a crisis at the ground level. We have certainly underlined the fact that the border personnel meets, the flag officers meets, and all that can happen, but we need to have that hotline, because that would easily, sooner, within a short time, help us in being ready for a resolution. So that is one of the things that I have highlighted, but I'm sure there are many others which are happening. I wouldn't want to burden you with more of what we are doing. It's a time when I wish this 10-year institution, which has contributed already greatly towards understanding China better, does well and continues its good work. We look forward to your inputs. I wish the center a great deal of success, the Chennai Center for China Studies. It's very catchy to say C3S, but I'm more comfortable with the longish name, but thanks very much for giving me this opportunity. I'll constantly look forward to learning from you. I wish the 2-day program all success. Thank you.
Kindly settle down. Authors to kindly come forward to receive the first copies from the Honorable Minister of Defence. The authors, Ms. Nappinai Damodaran, Ms. Krita, and Ms. Akanshka Soni. I request the dignitary to